The cold stone floor leached the last of the warmth from Elara's bones. Hunger was a familiar beast, a hollow ache that had been her constant companion for as long as she could remember. But this was different. This was the sharp, metallic claw of fear, twisting in her gut until she could barely draw breath. She was on her knees in the great hall of the Blackmere Citadel, the heart of the Shadowfang Kingdom, and before her sat the Alpha King, King Theron. His name was a blade whispered in the dark, a promise of violence and absolute authority. He was more myth than man, a creature of savage fury carved from granite and shadow. From her place on the floor, all she could see were his massive boots, caked with the mud of some distant bloody campaign, and the base of his throne, a monstrous thing of obsidian and dragon bone. She had been caught stealing a loaf of bread from the royal kitchens. In this kingdom, under his law, the punishment was death. 2 guards held her arms in a searing grip, their knuckles white. The murmur of the assembled court was a low, predatory growl around her. They smelled blood. They smelled weakness. She closed her eyes, waiting for the sentence, for the end of a life that had been little more than a slow starvation. "Look at me." The voice was not a shout. It was deeper than that, a resonance that vibrated through the stone, through her very marrow. It was not a request. It was an ancient power giving a command, and her body obeyed before her mind could rebel. Her head snapped up, her eyes flying open to meet his, and the world shattered. He was not a myth. He was a visceral reality, a storm of power contained in the form of a man. Broad shoulders strained the dark fabric of his tunic, and his black hair was a wild mane, falling over a face that was all harsh angles and brutal beauty. But it was his eyes that stole the air from her lungs. They were not brown or black. They were gold. Molten, luminous gold, burning with an impossible intensity. And they were fixed on her. The moment their gazes locked, something violent and elemental arced between them. It was a physical jolt, like lightning striking her soul. Heat, thick and suffocating, flooded her veins. A scent filled her head, pine and winter frost and something else, something wild and animal and utterly possessive. The beast of hunger in her stomach was silenced, replaced by a new, terrifying sensation, a deep, primal pull towards the very man who was about to order her death. King Theron went rigid on his throne. His knuckles turned white where he gripped the carved arms. A low growl, not entirely human, rumbled in his chest, a sound that silenced the whispering court in an instant. The golden fire in his eyes intensified, searing her, seeing something inside her that she didn't even know existed. His wolf, the terrifying beast that lived within the king, was staring out at her, and it was not looking at a thief. It was looking at something it had been hunting for an eternity. "Mine," the king breathed, the word a plume of frost in the cold air, a declaration that echoed with the weight of destiny. Confusion warred with her terror. What did he mean? The guards shifted, their grips faltering. The court held its collective breath. Elara could only stare, trapped in the molten gold of his gaze, her heart hammering a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs. He rose from his throne, a predator unfolding to his full, terrifying height. He moved with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with his immense size, descending the dais step by step, his eyes never leaving hers. The pull intensified with every foot of ground he closed between them. It was a physical rope, tightening around her soul, drawing her in. Her body trembled, not with fear anymore, but with a strange, burgeoning resonance, a humming deep within her that answered the call in his eyes. He stopped directly before her, close enough that she had to crane her neck to see his face. The sheer force of his presence was an oppressive wave, threatening to drown her. Oh. He reached out, his large, calloused hand moving with unnerving gentleness as he tilted her chin up. His touch was electric, a brand of searing heat against her cold skin. The guards released her instantly, stepping back as if burned. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. "Elara," she whispered, the name a fragile thing in the vast, silent hall. He studied her face, his golden eyes tracing her features as if memorizing a sacred text. He saw the grime on her cheek, the gauntness of her face, the terror in her wide, gray eyes. But his wolf saw something else. It saw starlight trapped in a cage of bone and skin. It saw its other half, the missing piece of its soul, kneeling in the dirt. A muscle feathered in his jaw. The rage that emanated from him was not directed at her. It was a bonfire of fury aimed at the world that had allowed her to suffer, that had brought her to him like this, starving, terrified, and condemned. He looked over her head at the assembled court, his gaze sweeping over them with cold contempt. "You brought her before me in chains," he snarled, the sound ripping through the silence. "You dragged my queen through the mud and accused her of stealing bread." A collective gasp rippled through the nobles. Queen? The word was an absurdity. She was a scullery maid, a no one. Elara's mind reeled. Was this some cruel joke? A new form of execution she had never heard of. He returned his focus to her, his expression softening into something fierce and possessive and achingly protective. He knelt before her, the alpha king of the Shadowfang kingdom, the wolf who bowed to no one, knelt in the filth of the floor, bringing his incandescent eyes level with hers. The entire world seemed to stop spinning. "You walked into my hall to die," he murmured, his voice a raw, broken thing, for her ears only. "You will leave it as my queen." And with that, he scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, lifting her from the cold stone and holding her against the solid wall of his chest. The warmth of him was overwhelming, chasing away a lifetime of cold. The scent of pine and winter enveloped her, and against her will, her exhausted body sagged against his. He turned and ascended the dais, not returning to his throne, but striding past it, towards the private doors that led to the royal wing, leaving behind a stunned and utterly silent court. As he carried her from the hall, she heard the frantic beat of his heart, a wild drum that matched the frantic rhythm of her own. She did not understand what was happening, but she knew with a certainty that defied all logic that her life was no longer her own. It had been claimed. The royal chambers were a world away from the cold, damp cellars she had called home. Firelight danced across walls hung with rich tapestries depicting ancient hunts and forgotten kings. Thick fur rugs silenced his footsteps as he carried her through a series of opulent rooms. He did not speak, his jaw set in a hard line, his every movement radiating a tightly controlled storm of emotion. He finally laid her down on a bed so large and soft, it felt like sinking into a cloud. For a moment she thought he might leave, but he simply stood over her, a mountain of a man, his golden eyes still burning with that same incomprehensible intensity. "You are safe here," he said, the words a vow. "No one will harm you." The absurdity of the statement almost made her laugh. The only person who had ever truly terrified her was standing right in front of her. "What is happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you are mine," he answered, as if it were the simplest, most obvious truth in the universe. "My mate. The other half of my soul, mate." The word was from old stories, from whispered legends the servants would share in the dark. A fated, unbreakable bond, a divine pairing that granted alpha wolves their true strength. It was a thing of myth, of fairy tales. It was not something that happened to starving orphans who stole bread. I don't understand," she stammered. He seemed to realize he was overwhelming her. A flicker of something, frustration, perhaps, or pain, crossed his face. "I know. It is a lot to comprehend. My wolf, it has known you were coming. It has been restless for years. The moment you entered the hall, it recognized you. I recognized you." Before she could respond, the doors opened and an elderly woman entered, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and knowing. She carried a tray with a steaming bowl of stew, a fresh loaf of bread, and a pitcher of water. She curtsied low, her eyes flicking from the king to the girl on the bed. "Lyra," Theron said, his voice clipped. "She needs you." The old woman, the royal healer, nodded. "Of course, my king." She approached the bed, her presence calming where his was a tempest. "You must eat, child. You are wasting away." Elara stared at the food, her stomach clenching with a hunger so profound it was painful. She had not seen a full meal in weeks. Theron watched her, a pained expression on his face. "Leave us," he commanded Lyra, his voice rough. He wanted to be the one to care for her, but he knew his presence was too much. He was too much. With a final lingering look at Elara, he turned and swept from the room, the doors closing behind him with a soft click. Lyra sat on the edge of the bed and pushed the tray closer. "He is not as fearsome as he appears," she said gently. "Not with you." "What does he want from me?" Elara whispered, finally reaching for the bread, her hands shaking. "Everything," Lyra replied simply. "You are his fated mate. The bond has called to him. It is a sacred, powerful connection, one that will complete him and anchor his soul. Without it, an alpha king can go mad, his rule becoming as brittle as his mind. The kingdom itself suffers." Elara ate ravenously, the warm stew a balm to her empty stomach. She listened as Lyra explained the lore, the words weaving a tapestry of magic and destiny that felt utterly alien. She spoke of the alpha wolf inside the king, a primal spirit that ruled his instincts, and how that spirit had been howling for its mate since the day he was born. "But why me?" Elara asked, her mouth full of bread. "I am nothing. No one." Lyra's knowing eyes softened with something that looked like pity. "Child, you are anything but nothing. The bond does not choose at random. It seeks a balance of power. If his is the shadow, yours must be the light." The healer paused, taking Elara's thin hand in her own gnarled one. "There is more to your blood than you know, much more." Over the next few days, Elara lived in a state of suspended disbelief. She was bathed in scented water, dressed in gowns of velvet and silk, and fed until the hollow ache in her belly was a distant memory. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, confined to the king's private tower. Theron visited often. He would sit in a chair across the vast room and simply watch her, his golden eyes filled with a raw, hungry yearning. He spoke of his kingdom, of the threats at his borders, of the political maneuverings of his council. He spoke to her as if she were already his confidant, his partner. He told her about the mate bond contract. It was an ancient formality, a document that would be signed and magically sealed before the council and the kingdom. It was a political necessity, a way for the rigid, power-hungry nobles to officially recognize the union. To Theron, it was a meaningless piece of paper. The true bond was already forged in their souls, a living, breathing thing that grew stronger with every moment they spent together. "They will not understand," he said one evening, his voice tight with frustration as he paced before the fire. "The council, the old houses, they expected me to form an alliance, to marry a high-born she-wolf from House Vanthorn or House Blackwood. They will see you as a weakness." "I am a weakness," Elara said quietly, looking down at her hands. They were clean now, the nails no longer broken and crusted with dirt, but they were still the hands of a servant, not a queen. He was across the room in a heartbeat, kneeling before her chair, his large hands capturing hers. "Never say that," he growled, his golden eyes blazing. "You are my strength, my anchor. They do not see what I see." He brought her hand to his lips, his touch gentle, reverent. The contact sent a jolt of that same primal energy through her, a warmth that spread from her hand all the way to her core. The bond was real. She could feel it, a humming, invisible thread that connected them. It pulsed with his emotions, his fierce protectiveness, his deep-seated loneliness, his overwhelming adoration for her. It was terrifying and intoxicating all at once. Lyra began to teach her, not just about the mate bond, but about the history of the kingdom, about the great bloodlines. One afternoon, as they sat in the tower's sun-drenched library, the healer brought out an ancient leather-bound tome. She opened it to a page illuminated with shimmering silver ink. The illustration depicted a woman with hair like spun moonlight, her hands raised as a soft, white light poured from them, driving back shadowy beasts. "The luminaries," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with awe. "An ancient and almost extinct bloodline. They were said to be living conduits of light, capable of healing the land, purifying corruption, and anchoring the very soul of the kingdom. It was said that a Blackmere king could only reach his full potential with a luminary queen at his side." Elara stared at the image, a strange sense of familiarity stirring within her. "The line was thought to be broken centuries ago, its last daughter lost during the Red Wars," Lyra continued, her eyes fixed on Elara's face. "They were hunted into extinction because of their power. There are those who would still kill to possess it, or to ensure it never rises again." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. "You think—" Elara started, her voice barely a whisper. "I think the bond does not make mistakes, child," Lyra said softly. "I think the king's wolf knew exactly who it had found, kneeling in the dirt of the great hall." The revelation was a crushing weight. A queen, a mate, a luminary. It was too much. She was Elara, the orphan, the thief. How could she possibly be any of those things? The life they described felt like a story about someone else, a costume she was being forced to wear. The internal test came in the form of the Royal Council. Theron, bound by ancient law, had to formally present her and the mate bond contract to them. He insisted she stand beside him, not behind him. Dressed in a gown the color of midnight, Elara stood on the dais, her hand resting hesitantly on Theron's arm as he faced the stern, unforgiving faces of the most powerful wolves in the kingdom. The leader of the opposition was Lord Valerius of House Vanthorn, a tall, silver-haired wolf with eyes like chips of ice. His daughter had been the presumed choice for Theron's queen, and his fury was a palpable, chilling force in the room. "An unnamed, unblooded stray, my king?" Valerius asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You would bind the sacred future of the Blackmire line to a commoner? You will address your queen with respect, Valerius." Theron's voice was a low, lethal rumble. The alpha command in it forced Valerius to dip his head, but the hatred in his eyes only intensified. Theron's beta, a wolf named Kael, stood at his right hand. He was younger than Theron, with a quick, reassuring smile and an easy confidence. He had been kind to Elara, bringing her books and telling her stories of Theron's victories in battle, trying to ease her fears. He stepped forward now, his expression placating. "Lord Valerius, the king's wolf has chosen. The bond is absolute. It is not for us to question." Kael's loyalty seemed unwavering, a rock in the turbulent sea of the council's disapproval. Elara felt a small surge of gratitude towards him, but the council was not appeased. They argued for hours, their words a barrage of legal precedents, bloodline purity, and veiled threats. Elara stood through it all, her head held high, though inside she was crumbling. She felt their scorn like a physical blow. She was the weak link, the impurity, the thing that would bring their great king to ruin. That night, the strain took its toll. Theron left her in their chambers, his face a grim mask of fury, as he went to deal with the political fallout. Alone in the cavernous room, Elara felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her chest, so intense it drove her to her knees. It was not her pain. It was his. Through the burgeoning bond, she could feel the crushing weight of his duty, the volcanic rage he was struggling to contain, and underneath it all, a deep, aching fear of losing her. The bond was becoming more tangible every day. Sometimes, when she was alone, she would feel a sudden wave of warmth and fierce protectiveness wash over her, and know he was thinking of her. She once dreamed of a snow-covered battlefield, of the scent of blood and the howl of a great black wolf, and woke with the taste of ash in her mouth, knowing she had shared a memory with him. It was an intimacy that was both terrifying and profoundly comforting. A few days later, Theron was called away to the northern border. A clan of wildlings was testing their defenses. He was loath to leave her, his wolf warring with his duty as king. "I will be back in a week," he promised, his hands framing her face, his golden eyes pleading with her to understand. "Kael will remain here. He is my most trusted brother. He will protect you with his life. No one will get to you." He kissed her then, a soft, hesitant press of his lips against hers. It was not a kiss of passion, but of desperation, a silent vow that he would return. The bond flared between them, a searing line of light and heat, and for a moment, she felt the raw, untamed power of his love for her. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. "I have a kingdom at my feet," he murmured against her lips. "But it is you I am afraid to lose." It was the first time she had seen him truly vulnerable, the stoic alpha king stripped bare, revealing the heart of a man terrified of being alone again. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The fear began to recede, replaced by a nascent flicker of her own fierce protectiveness. He was not just a king. He was Theron, and he was hers. His absence left a hollow ache in her soul. The tower felt colder, the silence more pronounced. Kael was a constant, reassuring presence, checking on her frequently, keeping the prying lords and ladies of the court at bay. But the castle itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The political tension was thicker than ever. Lord Valerius and his allies grew bolder in Theron's absence, their whispers echoing in the halls. One evening, unable to sleep, Elara wandered from her chambers. The bond was a throbbing, anxious thing inside her, humming with Theron's distant unease. Drawn by an instinct she didn't understand, she found herself in a darkened corridor near the council chambers. Voices, low and urgent, drifted from behind a heavy tapestry. "The contract is the key," a familiar voice said. It was Lord Valerius. "Once her mark is on it, the magic is binding. She will be tied not just to the king, but to the crown, and the crown is governed by the council." Then another voice spoke, and the blood in Elara's veins turned to ice. "He trusts her completely," Kael said, his voice stripped of its usual warmth, leaving only cold, sharp ambition. "He sees her as some divine savior. He does not see the leash she represents. Once she is bound by that contract, we can influence her. Through her, we can temper his excesses. We can guide the throne back to a more traditional path." "Guide it?" Valerius snorted. "You mean control it? Control him?" "He is my king," Kael said, a sliver of false loyalty in his tone. "I only wish to protect the kingdom from his more primal impulses. This girl makes him reckless. With the contract sealed, her power, whatever it may be, is tethered to the laws of the land. Our laws. We will hold the leash, Valerius, not him." Elara pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Betrayal. It was a poison, swift and devastating. Kael, Theron's most trusted friend, his brother. He was a snake whispering plots with the very man who wished to see her gone. They weren't trying to get rid of her. They were planning to use her. The mate bond contract wasn't a formality. It was a cage, a tool to control her, and through the bond, to control Theron. All his talk of protection, of safety, had it all been a lie? Was he part of this? Did he bring her here only to chain his own soul to the whims of his treacherous counsel? Doubt, cold and venomous, coiled in her heart. He had left her here, with him, with the traitor. A wave of nausea and blind panic washed over her. She stumbled back towards the tower, her mind reeling. The gilded cage was no longer just a metaphor. It was real. The soft bed, the silk gowns, the endless food, they were all just bait in a very elaborate trap. She burst into the king's study, a room she had only ever entered with him. Her eyes scanned the massive oak desk, piled high with maps and missives. And there it was, lying in a carved rosewood box. The mate bond contract. It was a beautiful, terrible thing. A scroll of pristine vellum, its edges illuminated with gold leaf, the ancient runes of the bond shimmering with latent magic. Theron's signature was already at the bottom, a bold, black slash of ink, a testament to his certainty, his faith. Beside it was a blank space waiting for her to shackle herself and him forever. Tears of rage and heartbreak streamed down her face. He had called her his queen, his anchor. But to his own beta, she was just a leash, a tool, a means to an end. She would not be their puppet. She would not be the chain used to break the man who had, against all odds, begun to capture her heart. If she was a weakness, she would remove herself from the equation. Her decision was instant and absolute. With trembling hands, she snatched the contract from its box. She ran to the massive hearth, where embers still glowed from the evening fire. She did not hesitate. She thrust the ancient document into the heart of the embers. The vellum curled, the golden ink flaring with a brief, pained light as the magic that bound it was violently undone. The contract blackened, turning to ash and smoke, the symbol of her fated union destroyed by her own hand. A sharp, tearing sensation ripped through her soul, a scream of protest from the bond itself. It felt like tearing her own skin. Worth it. She had to leave. Now. Before Theron returned and forced her to sign another. Before Kael and Valerius could spring their trap. She stripped off the silk gown, the finery of her cage, and pulled on the simple servant's tunic and trousers she had arrived in, which had been inexplicably left in the back of a wardrobe. A ghost of her old self, using the skills she had learned as a shadow in the castle's underbelly. She slipped out of the tower. She moved through servants' passages and forgotten corridors, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Every shadow seemed to hold a guard. Every sound was the footstep of discovery. But no one stopped her. No one even saw her. She was a ghost again, just as she had always been. She reached the stables, the smell of hay and horse a scent of freedom. She saddled a swift, dark mare, her hands moving with a desperate certainty. As she led the horse into the pre-dawn gloom of the courtyard, she cast one last look back at the towering citadel of Blackmere. It was a beautiful, dark prison. She swung herself into the saddle and rode. She did not look back again. With the ashes of her future scattered in a cold hearth and the raw, screaming wound of a broken bond tearing at her soul, Elara rode out at dawn, disappearing into the wild, gray lands beyond the king's reach. The moment the contract burned, hundreds of leagues to the north, Theron roared. It was not a sound of anger, but of pure, visceral agony. He collapsed to his knees in the snow, clutching his chest as a phantom fire tore through his soul. The bond, the delicate, vital connection to his mate, had been savaged. It was not gone, but it was frayed, screaming with her pain, her terror, her betrayal. "Elara," he choked out, his voice raw. He was on his feet in an instant, the Alpha King replaced by a force of pure, primal instinct. His men fell back as a murderous aura poured from him. His eyes bled from gold to burning amber, the wolf completely ascendant. He knew. He did not know how, but he knew she was gone. He had left her, and she was gone. The thought was a shard of ice in his heart, driving him into a feral madness. He abandoned the border, his duty, everything. There was only one thing that mattered: finding her. Elara rode for 2 days, pushing the horse and herself to the point of collapse. The wound in her soul festered, a constant, dull ache that echoed with a distant, furious agony that she knew was Theron's. She found refuge in a forgotten corner of the kingdom, the crumbling ruins of an ancient monastery nestled in a thick, mist-shrouded forest. The place felt old, steeped in a quiet, dormant power that soothed the frantic edges of her fear. She survived on what she could forage, her old life of deprivation serving her well. But she was not the same person who had stolen a loaf of bread. Something had changed within her. Sometimes, when she was terrified or desperate, a faint warmth would flood her hands, a soft internal light that gave her courage. It was the power Lyra had spoken of, the luminary blood, stirring in response to her distress. Her relief was short-lived. A week after she fled, they found her. Not Theron's royal guard, but men wearing the silver and black sigil of House Vanthorn. Lord Valerius's men. Kael must have directed them. Of course he had. He couldn't have his prize escape. She was cornered in the monastery's crumbling main sanctuary. 6 of them, hard-faced and armed, advanced on her, their swords drawn. There was nowhere left to run. Lord Valerius wants the girl alive, their leader sneered. He has plans for you. This was it. The end of her flight. The beginning of her life as a puppet. The defiance that had made her burn the contract surged through her, hot and bright. No, she would not be taken. She would not be used. As they lunged for her, a primal scream of terror and rage tore from her throat, and with it, the dam inside her broke. Light erupted from her body. It was not a gentle glow. It was a blinding, concussive wave of pure, white energy, a miniature sun detonating in the ancient stone hall. It threw the men back, their screams of pain swallowed by the incandescent roar. The light poured from her, a torrent of raw, untamed power that set the very air humming. The ancient runes carved into the monastery walls flared to life, resonating with her magic, amplifying it. She felt a connection not just to the bond, but to the land itself, to every rock and tree and blade of grass. She was the luminary. It was real. But the power was too much. It was a wild ocean, and she was drowning in it, her physical body unable to contain the celestial force she had unleashed. It threatened to tear her apart, to burn her out from the inside. And then she felt him. A furious, desperate howl echoed through the forest, a sound of rage and pain and homecoming. Through the blinding light, she saw a shape moving with impossible speed. A wolf. A monstrous creature of midnight fur and burning golden eyes, larger than any natural wolf, wreathed in an aura of shadow and raw power. Theron. He burst into the sanctuary, his feral wolf form a terrifying vision of royal fury. He saw her, a blazing figure of light, surrounded by the groaning, scorched bodies of Valerius's men. He did not hesitate. He ignored the men, his entire being focused on her, on the light that was both saving her and killing her. He slammed into the edge of her radiant aura, and the impact of shadow and light was explosive. He anchored himself, digging his massive claws into the stone floor, fighting his once toward her once through the crushing pressure of her power. The light seared his dark fur, but he did not stop. He had to get to her. He had to ground her before she burned herself to nothing. "I have you," a voice echoed in her mind. Not a spoken voice, but his voice, Theron's voice, speaking directly to her soul through the savaged, bleeding bond. "Hold on, Elara. I have you." He reached her, pushing his massive head against her torso, his presence a solid, grounding weight in the chaotic storm of her own power. He was an anchor of shadow in her sea of light. She collapsed against him, her consciousness fading, the torrent of light receding, flowing back into her, guided and soothed by his presence. As the last of the blinding light faded, she saw that the sanctuary was not empty. Lord Valerius stood in the ruined doorway, a cruel, triumphant smile on his face. Behind him stood Kael, his expression a mask of cold calculation. "Remarkable," Valerius said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "The legends were true after all. You see, Your Majesty, she is far too valuable to be left to your clumsy sentimentality." He gestured to the dozen more armed soldiers fanning out behind him. "And you, my king, are a beast, unfit to rule. Your own beta agrees. The council has already voted. You are deposed." Kael met Elara's gaze, and for the first time, she saw the depths of his ambition, the black rot of his betrayal. "It is for the good of the kingdom," he said, the words hollow and false. Theron's wolf form dissolved, melting away into the shape of the man, his clothes torn, his body smoking slightly from the force of her light. He stood over Elara's kneeling form, placing himself between her and the traitors. His golden eyes were chips of ice. "You brought him here," he said to Kael, his voice dangerously quiet. "I brought order," Kael countered. "You brought chaos. You would have burned the kingdom to the ground for a girl you just met." "She is not a girl," Theron snarled, his power rising again, a palpable cloak of shadow. "She is my queen, and you have just signed your own death warrants." The fight was brutal and swift. Valerius's men were well trained, but they were facing an enraged Alpha King. Theron moved like a phantom of death, his blade a blur of silver, his rage given form, but he was outnumbered, and he was still shielding Elara. Elara pushed herself to her feet, her body screaming in protest. The power was still thrumming beneath her skin, but it was different now. It was not a wild flood, but a deep, steady river. She could feel it, control it. She looked at Theron, fighting for her, for them, and she knew she would not let him fall. She raised her hands. This time, the light was not an explosion. It was a focused, brilliant lance of pure energy. It did not burn. It revealed. It struck Kael in the chest, and the light spread through him, illuminating not his flesh, but his soul. The entire sanctuary was filled with projected images, visions torn from Kael's own mind, his secret meetings with Valerius, his whispered words of poison in the council, his plan to use her, to shackle Theron, to seize power for himself. The truth, undeniable and absolute, was laid bare for all to see. Valerius's men faltered, their loyalty shaken as they witnessed the raw proof of their lord's treason. Valerius himself, seeing his plot unravel, let out a scream of fury and charged, not at Theron, but at Elara. He knew she was the source, the key. Theron intercepted him, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. But it was Elara who ended it. She drew on the bond, on the deep, unwavering well of Theron's strength, and he, in turn, drew on her light. Together, they were one. A final, focused pulse of light erupted from her, not a weapon of force, but of judgment. It washed over Valerius. He screamed as the light touched him, not burning his skin, but searing the corruption from his soul. He collapsed, not dead, but broken, his ambition turned to ash, leaving only a hollow, whimpering shell. Kael, exposed and defeated, made a desperate run for the forest. He did not get far. Theron's hand shot out, and shadows coalesced, wrapping around the traitor like living chains, dragging him back. Silence fell over the ruined sanctuary. It was over. Theron turned to her, his face a mess of emotions. Relief, awe, and a profound, soul-deep shame. He took a step towards her and then stopped, as if unworthy. "Elara," he breathed, his voice breaking. "I failed you. I left you with the snake. I did not see." She walked towards him, her legs unsteady, and reached up to touch his face. "You found me," she whispered. That was all that mattered. He fell to his knees before her, the great Alpha King, for the second time. He buried his face in her stomach, his massive shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. He was not a king. He was just a man, terrified and broken by the thought of what he had almost lost. "You knelt before me to beg," she said softly, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, echoing her own thoughts from that first day. But it is I who have been brought to my knees. By this feeling, by this bond, by him. He looked up at her, his golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I love you, he said, the words raw and true and torn from the deepest part of his soul. I love you, and I am not worthy of the air you breathe. Then we will have to be unworthy together, she replied, a small smile touching her lips for the first time. My king. With the traitors captured and the truth revealed, they returned to Blackmere Citadel. There was no resistance. The visions Elara had shown them had spread like wildfire, and the council, shamed and terrified, bowed to their rightful king and his luminary queen. Valerius was imprisoned in the deepest dungeon, his mind shattered by the light of his own treachery. Theron showed Kael a harsher mercy. He was exiled, stripped of his name and his wolf, cast out into the wilderness as a mortal man, a fate worse than death for one of the shapeshifters. That night, in the king's chambers, Theron did not produce another contract. Instead, he simply stood before her, his heart in his eyes. The bond between them was no longer a screaming wound. It was a calm, deep, powerful current, whole and healed, stronger than ever before. There will be no more contracts, he said, his voice thick with emotion. No more laws or councils, only this, only us. He drew her close, lowering his head to the curve of her neck. She felt his warm breath against her skin, a shiver of anticipation running through her. This was not about politics or power. This was about two halves of a soul finally coming home. I am yours, Elara, he murmured. Completely. And I am yours, Theron, she whispered back, tilting her head to give him better access. When his teeth gently grazed her skin, it was not a bite of possession, but of acceptance. A searing, brilliant light flooded her senses as he marked her, completing the bond. His memories, his feelings, his entire being poured into her, and hers into him. She felt his lonely childhood, the crushing weight of his crown, his centuries-long ache for a mate. He felt her years of starvation, her terror in the great hall, her heartbreak at the betrayal, and her fierce, defiant love. They were no longer two separate beings, but one soul in two bodies. The claiming was a silent, sacred vow, more powerful than any magic or ink. Months later, Queen Elara stood on the balcony overlooking the capital. The city thrived below, healthier and more vibrant than it had been in a century. The land itself was healing, responding to the presence of its luminary. She rested a hand on her gently swelling abdomen, a quiet smile on her face. Theron came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her, resting his chin on her shoulder. He placed his own large hand over hers. They are strong. His voice echoed in her mind, a warm, loving presence that was now a constant part of her. They have a good father, she sent back, leaning into his embrace. They ruled together, a perfect balance of shadow and light. He was the kingdom's sword and shield, his authority absolute but now tempered by a deep well of compassion she had unlocked in him. She was its heart and soul, her light fostering growth and healing, her quiet strength a constant source of counsel and wisdom. They were more powerful together than any Blackmere king had ever been alone. The kingdom was entering a golden age, and it was an age built not on a contract, but on a love that had been forged in fire, betrayal, and destiny. Thank you so much for listening to this story on His Wolf Knew First. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe so you never miss a new tale. Drop a comment below telling me which moment moved you the most. Your support truly means the world to me, and I'll see you in the next story on His Wolf Knew First.